On the street, a girl was about to be dishonored until a real cowboy intervened. The scorching air above the town of Sandstone Creek was so thick, it felt as though it could be touched. On the main street, scarred by wagon ruts and hoofprints, the sun melted every stone, turning the world into a golden brown palette. It was 1883. In this land, the law was as shifting as the sand beneath one's feet, and justice often boiled down to the speed with which a man could draw his Colt. On the outskirts, where ramshackle shacks seemed to grow into the dusty earth, an atmosphere permeated by despair and hard labor prevailed. In the distance, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer mingled with rare, muffled shouts from the Viper Saloon, as if the town itself breathed this hot, suffocating air. Evelyn Gray, a tall and graceful girl of 22, stood by a dilapidated wagon. Her hands engaged in dirty but necessary work. She was trying to free a stuck wheel. Her dress, simple, of faded blue serge, was smeared with clay and road dust. But even through this everyday grime, her innate grace shone through. Her long, chestnut-brown hair, the color of autumn walnuts, was gathered into a casual braid, but individual strands had escaped and clung to her sweaty temple. Her eyes, large and expressive, the color of a clear summer sky, were filled not with despondency, but rather with an exhausting weariness, an echo of countless days spent struggling for survival. They reflected a deep, almost unbearable sadness, hidden beneath a veneer of forced resilience. Her every movement was deliberate, though burdened by effort, betraying years of physical labor. She was not one to give up easily, but now her strength was waning. Evelyn's father, Thomas Gray, had succumbed to gold fever several years prior, selling their small plot of land in the east and moving west in search of untold riches. But instead of gold, they found only harsh reality, arduous labor in the mines, constant deprivation, and eventually, his untimely death from tuberculosis just a year ago. Evelyn was left alone in this merciless world, without a single soul to lean on. Her only inheritance was this cursed wagon, which served as their home, and a handful of copper coins, barely enough for bread. She didn't know what to do next, where to go, whom to turn to. Every day was a struggle, every hour a test. Her attempts to free the wheel from the sticky mud were in vain. Despair began to constrict her chest. At that moment, 3 men, guffawing loudly, tumbled out of the Viper Saloon. They were part of a local gang led by a man named Blackwood, a name spoken with apprehension in Sandstone Creek. These 3, Frank, Billy, and Big, red-haired Mike, were known for their cruelty and complete lack of moral principles. Their eyes, cloudy with whiskey, instantly lit up when they saw Evelyn, exhausted and defenseless, struggling with the wagon. Disgusting grins, full of vile intentions, appeared on their faces. Well, pretty little thing, what are you doing here, all alone?" Frank rasped, his voice thick with lust. He was a short, wiry man with scruffy stubble and piercing, ferret-like eyes. His leather vest was unbuttoned, revealing a dirty shirt. Dilly, in contrast, was tall and lanky, with long, sticky fingers that he nervously rubbed against his chin, his gaze no less repulsive. Mike, meanwhile, was a veritable mountain of muscle, with a red, weather-beaten face and sparse, rotten teeth exposed in a sneer. He held a nearly empty whiskey bottle in his hand, from which a sickly sweet scent wafted down the street. Evelyn felt her heart plummet into an abyss. She had heard of men like them, heard of what happened to girls who fell into their hands. Fear, cold then sticky, wrapped around her body, but she tried to compose herself. "Leave me alone." Her voice, though trembling, rang out unexpectedly firmly. She grabbed the nearest rock, ready to defend herself. The 3 men burst into laughter. "Look at her, Bose. What a feisty one. I like him like that." Mike took a step forward, his gaze fixed on her figure. He looked like the embodiment of brute force, ready to crush anything in his path. His movements were slow, but full of hidden menace, like a bear scenting prey. Evelyn recoiled, her eyes flashing, but she knew her chances were slim. She was alone, against 3, and her rock seemed a ludicrous defense against their animalistic strength. She looked around, searching for help, but the street was empty. The residents of Sandstone Creek preferred not to interfere when Blackwood's gang was having fun. Their fear was understandable, but for Evelyn, it was tantamount to a death sentence. Mike reached out a dirty hand toward her, his fingers, thick and short, ready to grab her. "Come with us, sweetheart. We'll show you what real fun is," he rasped, his whiskey-laced breath washing over her face. Evelyn felt nauseous. She squeezed the rock, her nails digging into her palm. At that moment, she saw an approaching silhouette. A rider. His figure, tall and powerful, slowly emerged against the backdrop of the setting sun. He rode slowly, as if in no hurry, but every movement of his horse, a black Mustang with glistening, dark fur, was filled with hidden energy. His hat obscured his face, but an aura of calm, almost mystical power emanated from him. He was not from these parts. The men, noticing the rider's approach, were momentarily distracted. Frank, squinting, said, "Hey, Drifter, ride on by. We've got private business here." The rider did not answer. He simply continued forward, his gaze fixed on the scene. Evelyn, despite her fear, felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this man would help her. But she knew that in the Wild West, help rarely came without a price. He rode closer, and the sunlight glinted off his face. It was Jim Blackwood, a tall, lean man in his mid-30s, with a face carved from stone under the scorching sun. His skin was tanned, etched with fine wrinkles around his piercing, steel-gray eyes, the color of a stormy sky. They were deep and thoughtful, but a fire burned within them that rarely dimmed. Dark, almost black hair, slightly disheveled, escaped from beneath his wide-brimmed cowboy hat, casting a shadow over his high cheekboned face. Long, strong hands, accustomed to hard labor, rested on the grips of two Colts, securely holstered. His attire was simple but functional. A sun-faded shirt of thick fabric, a leather vest, worn but sturdy jeans, and boots covered in a thick layer of dust. He was the embodiment of a lone wanderer, a man who had seen much and survived even more. His presence filled the air with a tension that was almost physical. Jim dismounted, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't utter a word, simply stood between Evelyn and the men, his figure like a wall, unyielding and full of menace. His gaze, cold and piercing, settled on Mike, who still held the whiskey bottle. "Take your filthy hands off her." Jim's voice was low, hoarse, like the scrape of steel on stone, but there was no hint of fear in it. Only pure, undisguised threat. "Or I'll make you regret the day you were born." His words, spoken so calmly, so confidently, stunned the bandits. They knew that this was no ordinary drifter. Mike, still holding the bottle, choked on a laugh. "And who are you to tell us what to do, friend?" he growled, trying to appear brave, but uncertainty already flickered in his eyes. "We're just having some fun." Jim's face remained impassive. "I'm the one who doesn't like it when the defenseless are harmed." His hand, almost imperceptibly, rested on the grip of his revolver. The tension in the street became unbearable, hanging in the air like the silence before a storm. Evelyn, trembling, watched Jim. She saw that he was ready to fight, ready to risk his life for her, a complete stranger. A new, strong feeling was born in her heart, not just hope, but something far deeper, akin to gratitude bordering on admiration. Her eyes, still full of fear, now looked at him with almost childlike trust. It seemed to her that the Wild West itself, with all its cruelty, paused for a moment, awaiting the outcome. This moment was the beginning of something irreversible, something that would forever change Evelyn's life. The tension in the street of Sandstone Creek thickened to an invisible but palpable density, enveloping everyone like suffocating smoke. Jim Blackwood stood motionless. His figure, carved from rock-hard resolve, served as an unbreakable barrier between Evelyn and the three predators. His steel-gray eyes, the color of a stormy sky, bored into Mike, who still gripped a nearly empty whiskey bottle. Every wrinkle around Jim's sun-baked eyes seemed like the imprint of countless battles, and his calm was more terrifying than any shout. Evelyn, pressed against the wagon, felt her heart pound against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her eyes, full of tears and fear, were fixed on Jim, trying to decipher his intentions, his true essence. She couldn't understand why this stranger was risking his life for her, but deep down, a faint but tenacious thread of intrigue had already begun to form. Who was he? Why was he here? Mike, trying to maintain the last vestiges of his dignity, bared his rotten teeth in a sneer. "What did you say, friend?" "I didn't quite catch that. Sounds like the wind in my ears." He took a deliberately slow step to the side, trying to flank Jim. His companions, Frank and Billy, took positions on either side, their gazes full of malicious anticipation, but also a hint of unease. They knew they had encountered someone who wasn't intimidated by their reputation. Frank, with his cunning ferret-like eyes, feverishly considered the situation, his fingers twitching nervously near the knife handle tucked into his belt. Billy, lanky and elusive, kept his hands free, ready for any move. Jim did not move from his spot, but his right hand, like a living shadow, twitched, and two silver coal slid from their holsters with an almost silent click, aimed directly at Mike and Frank's chests. The movement was so swift, so lightning fast, that none of the bandits had time to even blink. It was a demonstration not just of speed, but of absolute mastery, honed by years of brutal necessity. Sunlight glinted off the blued barrels, turning them into deadly ice. The atmosphere instantly changed. The snickers died in their throats. Fear, real, cold fear, gripped the bandits. Their grins slipped from their faces, revealing bewilderment. I said, "Take your filthy hands off her." Jim's voice was even lower now, even more dangerous, each word like the crack of a whip. "Otherwise, you'll see what a man's insides look like when they're spilled onto a dusty road." I don't repeat myself. He didn't raise his voice, but the intonation was such that his every word echoed in the heated air. Mike paled beneath the layer of road dust and red capillaries. His eyes darted between Jim and the revolvers, then dropped to the ground. The whiskey bottle slipped from his weakening fingers and shattered against the stones, spilling amber liquid that immediately began to evaporate in the heat. Frank, the shrewdest of the trio, assessed the situation in a split second. He'd seen this 100 times. A man with such speed and calm wasn't bluffing. Dilly, swallowing nervously, took another step back, his eyes wide with terror. Their animalistic instincts screamed danger. We understand, friend," Mike croaked, his voice barely audible. "We were just joking, having some fun." He slowly raised his hands, showing he was unarmed. "The jokes are over." Jim cut in. "Now get out, and if I see you near this girl again, or any other, you'll regret not being born blind and handless." His gaze was such that it left no doubt as to the seriousness of his words. The three bandits, crestfallen and humiliated, cast dirty, hate-filled glances at Evelyn, then slowly, backing away, moved toward the saloon. Their steps were heavy. The former arrogance had vanished. They disappeared through the viper doors, leaving behind only wisps of dust and the scent of fear. The silence that followed their departure was deafening. Evelyn stood trembling all over, her eyes wide open. She slowly exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding since the bandits appeared. The rock she'd gripped in her hand fell, hitting the ground with a dull thud. She wanted to collapse to her knees, but her legs wouldn't obey. Gratitude, immense, all-consuming, mingled with a deep, almost instinctive hatred for those who had almost deprived her of what was most precious. Jim slowly lowered his revolvers, smoothly and silently returning them to their holsters. He didn't utter a word, simply turned to Evelyn. His gaze, now without its former cold threat, was still piercing, scrutinizing, as if he was trying to understand her. There was no triumph or self-satisfaction in his eyes, only the same eternal weariness she had already noticed. "Are you all right, miss?" His voice was still low and hoarse, but now there was a note in it that Evelyn didn't immediately recognize, a cautious, barely perceptible concern. Evelyn couldn't answer immediately. A spasm constricted her throat. I think, yes," she whispered, trying to collect herself. She lowered her gaze, feeling uncomfortable under his intense scrutiny. She was exhausted, dirty, and felt awkward appearing before this man in such a state. Yet, she couldn't tear her gaze away from him. Her mind raced, trying to comprehend what had happened. Who was he? This man who appeared out of nowhere and so easily dispatched three ruffians who had terrorized the entire town. Her gratitude was immense, but it was mixed with caution. The Wild West had taught her not to trust anyone blindly. Jim nodded, as if satisfied with her answer, but his gaze lingered on the stuck wagon wheel. He approached it, his movements confident and economical, examined the stuck wheel, then glanced at the viscous mud. The wheel sunk deep, he commented, his voice devoid of emotion. "You can't manage it alone." Evelyn felt a pang of irritation. He was right, but his statement of fact made it sound as if she were utterly helpless. I know," she replied, her lips pressed together, "but I have no one, and no money either." A hint of bitterness crept into her voice. Jim didn't react to her tone. He simply removed his wide-brimmed hat, revealing dark, slightly disheveled hair. His forehead was beaded with sweat, and his cheekbones stood out sharply against his tanned face. He placed his hat on the wagon seat and, rolling up the sleeves of his faded shirt, leaned down to assess the situation. His muscular arms, scarred, looked strong and capable of any work. Evelyn watched him, her gaze tracing his broad back, his tense arm muscles. Not just intrigue, but a feeling of admiration grew within her for his strength, his calm, his willingness to help. "Help me find a sturdy branch or a crowbar," Jim said, his gaze sweeping the surroundings. "We'll get this wheel out." Evelyn, taken aback, didn't move immediately. She had expected him to simply point the way or ask for payment for his help. But he asked for nothing. He simply started to act. There was a strange, inexplicable straightforwardness to him that both unnerved and attracted her. She quickly looked around and found a thick, sturdy branch lying against the wall of the nearest shack. She brought it to Jim. Together they set to work. Jim, using the branch as a lever, slowly began to lift the wagon, his muscles straining beneath his skin. Evelyn, following his instructions, placed rocks under the wheel to secure its position. The work was hard, but they worked in unison, almost without words, as if they had known each other for a long time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery red and orange tones, and the dust rising from their efforts glistened in the last race. Finally, with a loud crunch, the wheel gave way, and the wagon swayed slightly, freed from the muddy trap. Evelyn felt an immense wave of relief. She looked at Jim, her eyes shining with gratitude. You helped me so much. I don't know how to thank you." Jim wiped the sweat from his forehead, his gaze still serious. "No need. Just be careful. This town isn't the safest place for a girl alone." He put his hat back on, his face once again cast in shadow. Evelyn felt a pang of disappointment. Was he just going to leave? After everything that had happened? She didn't want him to leave. She felt that this man, though he seemed stern and aloof, was the only one who had shown her any care in this cruel world. A strong desire to know him, to understand him, to at least somewhat penetrate his stone mask, was born within her. You're not from Sandstone Creek, are you?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost timid. Jim stopped. His gaze, through the shadow of his hat, fell on her. "No, I'm passing through. Looking for a man." "Who?" Evelyn's curiosity overcame her caution. Jim hesitated for a moment, his lips pressed into a thin line. "A man named Blackwood. They say he's here. The leader of the local gang." A hint of something more than just a search sounded in his voice, something like a long-standing, deep grievance that burned in his eyes. Evelyn shuddered. Blackwood. She knew that name. This was the very man whose thugs had almost dishonored her. Now she looked at Jim in a completely different light. He wasn't just a savior, he was an avenger, a hunter. Her feelings for him began to change, shifting from simple gratitude to a complex mixture of fear, admiration, and deep, unsettling intrigue. Her heart, which had just been full of gratitude, now contracted with the realization that this man, her savior, was connected to the dark side of the Wild West, to the world she so desperately tried to avoid. This news about Blackwood wasn't just information, it was a spark that ignited a fire of curiosity in Evelyn. She felt that her destiny, in some mysterious way, had intertwined with the destiny of this stern, silent cowboy. The fading rays of the setting sun painted the dusty street of Sandstone Creek in blood red and charcoal gray tones, foreshadowing the imminent arrival of the cold desert night. Jim's words, spoken in a low, husky voice like distant thunder, echoed in Evelyn's mind. A man named Blackwood. They say he's here. The leader of the local gang. This name, steeped in notoriety, now took on a new, sinister meaning for her. The bandits who had just threatened her were his dogs. And this man, her savior, was pursuing the same demon that had indirectly touched her life. Her initial, almost childlike gratitude instantly gave way to a complex whirlpool of emotions, a sharp fear for her safety, for she was now drawn into a deadly vendetta, bordered on burning intrigue and a strange, inexplicable attraction to this stern, silent cowboy. Jim seemed not to notice the confusion on her face. His gaze was fixed in the distance, on the tops of the hills, as if he already saw his enemy. Not a single muscle twitched on his weather-beaten face, but Evelyn, with her heightened intuition, caught a barely noticeable tension in his powerful shoulders, a slight clenching of his jaw. It seemed as though he carried an invisible burden that made him simultaneously captivating and frightening. "It's still late to continue on." Jim's voice was dry, pulling Evelyn from her thoughts. "It's dangerous to ride in the dark." He nodded towards an abandoned shack, standing a little way off the main street, with broken windows and a dilapidated door. "We need a roof over our heads. And a fire." Evelyn swallowed. The idea of spending the night next to this man, this hunter whose hands had just held two smoking Colts, filled her with mixed feelings. On the one hand, It was a danger she couldn't ignore. On the other, it was the only real protection in this town teeming with Blackwood's thugs. She realized she had no choice. "All right," she replied, trying to make her voice sound firm, without a tremor. "My wagon. It has some supplies. And blankets." Jim merely nodded briefly. He remounted his black Mustang, whose dark fur in the encroaching twilight seemed part of the shadow itself. Evelyn climbed onto the seat of her wagon, and they slowly moved towards the shack. Every rustle, every crack of a twig seemed to her a harbinger of new danger. The air cooled, bringing with it the smell of dust and pungent sagebrush. The shack turned out to be worse than it looked from a distance. Drafts swept through it like hungry ghosts, and the first stars peered through holes in the roof. Jim, without a word, dismounted. His movements were efficient and devoid of fuss. He quickly inspected the structure, ensuring there were no welcome guests. Then, without looking at Evelyn, he began to unload her wagon, pulling out rolled blankets, a small sack of provisions, and a couple of cooking pots. Evelyn, feeling a little awkward but understanding the necessity, also joined in the work, trying to be useful. She pulled out dry kindling and splinters she had saved for lighting, and quickly built a small fire in the center of the shack, where a hearth might once have stood. The flames quickly flared up, casting dancing shadows on the dilapidated walls and their focused faces. Jim spread out the blankets, creating a semblance of a cozy corner. Then he moved to the entrance, his figure, tall and powerful, filling the doorway. He stood there like a guard, his steel gray eyes carefully scanning the surroundings, listening to every sound. Evelyn felt a little safer, knowing he was on guard. "I have coffee." She broke the silence, her voice softer than she expected. "And some dried meat." Jim, without turning around, simply nodded briefly. "Good. Coffee wouldn't hurt." She began to prepare dinner, her movements accustomed and confident. Soon, the aroma of hot coffee and roasted meat spread through the shack. She handed Jim a mug and a piece of meat. He took them, his work-roughened fingers lightly touching hers, and Evelyn felt a slight, unexpected electric current. She caught his gaze, which lingered on her face for a moment, and something elusive flickered within it, something that went beyond mere wariness. They ate in silence. Every sound, the crackling of the fire, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of the wind seemed loud in this stillness. Evelyn watched Jim, how he ate, slowly and deliberately, as if savoring every bite, how his eyes constantly scanned the space, even as he ate. He was a true man of the Wild West, a survivor of the harshest conditions. "Why are you looking for Blackwood?" Evelyn couldn't help but ask, breaking the silence. Her curiosity, fueled by intrigue, was stronger than her caution. Jim slowly put down his mug, his steel gray eyes, reflecting the firelight, grew even darker. "That's an old story, miss. Not for a lady's ears." His voice was stern, but there was no harshness in it, rather a weariness she had already noticed. "I'm no longer a child to be kept from the truth," Evelyn countered, her voice firm. "And if you're hunting him, it might involve me too. I have a right to know." She felt the growing resistance within her to his aloofness. Jim stared at her intently. Something like a momentary hesitation flickered in his eyes, but then his face became impassive again. "Blackwood. He took everything from me. My family, my home, my name." Each word was spoken with a deep, barely restrained pain that broke through his stone mask. "My name isn't Blackwood. My name is Jim Holmes. Samuel Blackwood killed my father and brother when I was 16. He burned our farm to the ground." His voice became even quieter, almost a whisper, but every word was filled with rage and long-held grief. "I only survived because I was away. I came back to find ashes and corpses. And ever since, I've been looking for him. I won't stop until he pays." Evelyn felt her heart clench. Now she understood him, understood his pain, his motivation. This wasn't just revenge, it was an attempt to restore a shattered world, an attempt to find meaning in his mutilated life. Compassion, deep and all-encompassing, filled her. At that moment, she saw not just a stern cowboy, but a wounded man carrying an immense tragedy. Her fear of him was replaced by deep empathy, and her intrigue grew into something more, a desire to understand him, to support him. I'm so sorry, Jim," she whispered, her hand instinctively reaching for him, but she stopped, not daring to touch him. I know what loss feels like." Her voice held genuine sorrow, an echo of her own losses. Jim merely nodded briefly. He didn't reply, but his gaze, meeting hers, softened for a moment, as if her words had touched a deeply hidden chord in his soul. Silence settled between them, but now it was different, filled with understanding and shared grief. Suddenly, a dull thud and a rustle came from outside. Jim instantly tensed. His hand, as if by instinct, flew to the grip of his revolver. His steel-gray eyes darted towards the doorway, and an expression of dangerous readiness appeared on his face. "Quiet," he whispered, his voice barely audible, but steel rang in it. "Looks like we're not alone." Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. Her heart pounded again, but this time not from fear of Jim, but from a shared threat. She grabbed her carbine, which stood against the wall, and prepared herself. She no longer felt helpless. She was ready to fight alongside him, to protect her fragile life and, perhaps, to give him what he had lost, a chance for justice. This night, which began with a threat, had now turned into a test of their unexpectedly formed bond, a trial of their intriguing partnership. "Stay here, and don't poke your head out unless I tell you to," he whispered, his voice low and commanding. There was no request in his tone, only an order that Evelyn, to her surprise, had no desire to disobey. It wasn't born of concern, but of practicality, the experience of a man who knew the cost of a mistake in such a situation. Outside, a louder snap was heard, followed by a low, clipped voice. "Boss, look. Seems like someone settled in here. I could use a smoke." It was a voice Evelyn would recognize anywhere. Frank, one of those thugs that Jim had run out of town. A hatred for him, for his cowardly nature, for his despicable return, flooded over her. Jim didn't show a single emotion. He only pressed himself closer to the wall, his breathing steady and deep. "There are 3 of them," he whispered, his eyes narrowing. "Frank, Billy, and Mike. They've come back for you." There was no reproach in his words, just a statement of fact, but Evelyn felt a pang of guilt. It was because of her that he was in such a mess. "What are we going to do?" Evelyn asked, her voice also a near whisper. She gripped the carbine tighter, her fingers feeling the cold metal. "We wait," Jim answered. "They'll try to come in from the back. Mike will most likely try to break through the wall or the window. Frank will be a distraction. And Billy, he's the cleverest one. He'll be looking for a weak spot." He spoke as if describing long familiar things, his analysis chillingly accurate. Several long, tense minutes passed. The fire in the center of the shack slowly died down, casting ever weaker shadows. Every rustle outside the wall, every breath Evelyn took, seemed unbearably loud. She heard muffled voices from outside the wall, then laughter. They were confident in their victory. This stirred a surge of fury in her. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed from the shack's back wall. The wood splintered, and the massive figure of Mike appeared in one of the window openings. He was trying to break through the wall with his head, like a wild beast. At the same time, from around the corner, Frank's loud cry was heard. "Hey, pretty lady, we know you're in there. Come on out before it's too late." He fired his revolver into the air to create a diversion. Jim reacted instantly. He didn't shoot Mike, who was in the most advantageous position for them. Instead, he darted to the other window, from which Frank's voice had come, and fired several quick, precise shots. 3 shots rang out in quick succession, and Frank's cry abruptly stopped. A dull thump of a falling body followed. "One down," Jim said calmly, without turning around. Evelyn felt a shiver run down her body, mixed with admiration. His composure, his precision, his ability to act in a critical situation, it was all astonishing. She had seen death before, but this close, this instant, it was the first time. She swallowed hard, but her resolve didn't waver. Mike, realizing that Frank was neutralized, began to pound the wall with renewed force in a rage. The wood creaked and crumbled, and after a few seconds, a large hole formed in the wall. He, growling, tried to stick his head inside. Jim, without losing a second, turned and shot Mike. The bullet hit him in the shoulder, and he recoiled with a groan, but he was too strong to simply give up. He continued to attack, his face distorted by pain and fury. "Don't you dare, Jim!" Billy shouted, his voice coming from the roof. He, the cleverest of them all, had found the weak spot, the roof. He was trying to climb through a hole in the dilapidated roof to get in from behind. The situation was getting more complicated. Jim was caught between 2 fires. Mike from behind, Billy from above. The fire was dying out, leaving them in almost complete darkness. Jim, like lightning, rushed to the hole in the wall where Mike was, and, grabbing his hand that had almost snuck inside, yanked it towards him. A crunching sound was heard, and Mike roared in pain. His body, losing balance, crashed to the ground. Jim, not giving him a chance to recover, pulled out his knife and pressed it against the thug's throat. "One more move, and you'll join your friend," Jim growled, his voice as cold as ice. At that moment, Billy finally broke through the roof and jumped to the floor. He held a long hunting knife in his hand. His eyes, gleaming with madness, were fixed on Jim. He was full of resolve to avenge his comrades. Evelyn, seeing Billy, raised her carbine without hesitation and fired. The bullet whistled past the thug's head, but made him recoil. This gave Jim a split second. He released Mike, who was writhing on the ground in pain, and turned to face Billy. Their eyes met. Billy, with a furious lunge, charged at Jim, his knife glinting in the dim light. Jim, not flustered, dodged the strike and delivered a counter. It was a knife fight, fast, brutal, and deadly. Steel scraped against steel, sparks flew, illuminating their tense faces. Evelyn watched them, her heart pounding wildly. She saw how Jim moved like a dancer, his body a single muscle, every one of his blows precise and powerful. But Billy was no less agile, his eyes burning with madness, and he was dangerous. The struggle continued for several agonizing moments. Then, with a sudden, sharp motion, Jim delivered the decisive blow. Billy's knife flew out of his hand, and he fell to the floor with a scream, his arm deeply cut. Jim, breathing heavily, stood over him, his knife stained with blood. "Do you understand now?" Jim growled, his voice full of fury, but at the same time, with a note of exhaustion. "No one gets away from me. No one avoids the price." Mike, who was still writhing on the ground, groaned. Billy, clutching his wounded arm, looked at Jim with eyes full of animal terror. Evelyn, trembling, lowered her carbine. The tension had lifted, but the consequences of the fight were obvious. Frank was dead. Mike and Billy were wounded and humiliated. Jim Holmes, her savior, was not just a cowboy, but a true warrior, a man capable of ruthlessness for the sake of justice. Silence once again descended upon the shack, now heavy and filled with the smell of blood and gunpowder. Evelyn walked up to Jim, her eyes full of conflicting emotions, fear of his cruelty mixed with a deep admiration for his strength and resolve. And, of course, attraction. An attraction to this dangerous, mysterious man who, against all odds, had protected her. What now?" she whispered, pointing to the wounded thugs. Jim, wiping his knife on his leather trousers, put it back in its sheath. His face was just as stern, but another shadow had appeared in his eyes, a shadow of indecision. He looked at Evelyn, then at the wounded, as if contemplating his next actions. At that moment, when she saw in him not only a warrior, but also a man facing a difficult moral choice, her attraction to him grew even stronger. She felt that his story, his pain, his destiny, had become a part of her own. The smoke from the gunpowder slowly dissolved in the cooling air of the abandoned shack, mixing with the heavy smell of blood and dust. The silence that had hung in the air after the fight was thick and oppressive, like an invisible shroud that had covered everyone present. Jim Holmes, still holding his blood-stained knife, stood over the wounded Mike and Billy, his figure filled with stern resolve, but a shadow of indecision flickered in his steel eyes. Evelyn, trembling but not retreating, stood beside him, her carbine lowered, but her fingers tightly gripping the stock. She looked at the wounded thugs, then at Jim, and in her heart, a hurricane of conflicting emotions was raging. Anger at their treachery and cruelty mixed with a deep compassion for the pain they were experiencing, even if it was deserved. And somewhere deep, beneath this vortex, a growing, powerful attraction to Jim, to his strength, his justice, his dark but alluring aura. She saw that behind the mask of coolness, a man capable of deep feelings. Mike, with a torn shoulder, was writhing on the floor, his groans low and bestial, and his face distorted with pain. Billy, clutching his bloody arm, tried to get up, but his strength was leaving him. His gaze, full of animal fear and hatred, was fixed on Jim. The death of Frank, whose body lay by the wall, left no doubt about the seriousness of this cowboy's intentions. Jim slowly, as if thinking about every movement, put his knife back in its sheath. His gaze, cold and penetrating, settled on Billy. "Where is Samuel Blackwood?" Jim's voice was low and even, without a single note of emotion, but in it, a hidden threat could be felt, one that could pierce right through. He leaned over the wounded man, pressing his foot on his injured arm, and Billy squealed in pain. I don't know. I swear. Holmes, he left Sandstone Creek a long time ago." Billy gasped out, his eyes darting in panic. He called Jim by his real name, which only confirmed his connection to Blackwood. Evelyn winced. Jim Holmes. Not Blackwood. The mystery of his past, which he had mentioned, now took on even darker contours. She realized that he wasn't just hunting a criminal, he was pursuing a personal enemy, a man who had destroyed his life. Compassion for Jim intensified, mixing with an uneasy premonition. Jim frowned, his lips pressed into a thin line. You're lying. He's here. Tell me where, or I swear you'll regret you chose the life of a thug. His foot pressed harder, and Dilly howled again. No, it's the truth. He laughed. A week ago. To Oak Creek. He's got a new deal there, with gold. Dilly spat out, his voice filled with despair. He left us to look after the town, to look after his business. He was gasping, his face wet with sweat and tears. Jim backed away, his eyes narrowed. Oak Creek, a new deal with gold. The information was valuable, but he didn't entirely trust this thug. He knew that people like him would like to save their skin, but at the same time, there was a grain of truth in Billy's words. The desperation was too genuine. Looking after the town, you say? Jim's voice grew even colder. What business? Dilly, fearing further pain, spoke quickly. He wanted to buy up the land. All the land around Sandstone Creek. He said that soon a big road would be built here. A railway. Evelyn gasped. A railway. It was unthinkable. Sandstone Creek was a backwater town, forgotten by God. But if a railway was really planned here, it would mean change. Big changes. And, possibly, big money. And this explained why Blackwood was clinging to this land, using his thugs to intimidate the locals. Her own wagon, her small plot of land, her unfortunate fate, all of it now seemed part of a much larger and more sinister game. The attraction to Jim, to his knowledge of this world, to his ability to stand against this evil, grew in her with new force. Jim once again crouched down in front of Billy, his gaze probing. Where exactly in Oak Creek? Does he have a hideout there? Dilly hesitated, his eyes darting around. I don't know the exact place, but he is a man there. Old Jack, he's always been his right-hand man. He knows. Where can I find old Jack? He owns a saloon, the Black Rabbit, right in the center of Oak Creek. But be careful, Holmes, Jack. He's loyal to Blackwood to the core. Jim nodded, his face impassive. The information was obtained. He stood up, his gaze stopping on Mike, who was still groaning on the floor. What should we do with them? Evelyn asked, her voice quiet, but with a note of resolve. Jim looked at her, and the same shadow of indecision she had noticed earlier appeared in his eyes. Leave them here. They won't survive. Take them to town. That's a risk. Blackwood's gang might set up an ambush. He was speaking more to himself than to her. His words measure every decision had its consequences. Evelyn understood his dilemma. In the Wild West, mercy was often a luxury one couldn't afford, but to leave them to die, even if they were thugs, seemed unthinkable to her. The deep compassion she was born with, despite all the hardships of life, spoke up within her. We can't just leave them. Her voice was firm. Even if they're like that, it's not human. She looked at Jim, her eyes, the color of a summer sky, full of pleading hope. Jim looked at her for a long time, his gaze penetrating, as if he was trying to see into her soul. Something elusive flickered in his eyes, perhaps respect for her own wavering kindness, perhaps something deeper, resembling an inner conflict. He was a man hardened by brutal battles, but in her words, there was a truth he seemed to have forgotten. All right, he finally said, his voice quiet. We won't leave them, but it will be dangerous. And you have to understand, it could cost us our lives. Evelyn only gave a short nod, her heart filled with relief, mixed with a new, sharp feeling for Jim. He had listened to her. He, the stern avenger, had allowed himself to act on his conscience, on her conscience. It was not just an acknowledgement, it was the beginning of a deep connection. Jim quickly tied up the wounded thugs, using scraps of rope found in the shack. Then, with Evelyn's help, he lifted them onto her wagon, laying them on blankets. Mike, despite the pain, tried to resist, but Jim quickly subdued him, threatening him with his knife. Dilly, on the other hand, weakened and frightened, only groaned quietly. They need help, Jim said, examining Billy's wounds. The wound is deep. If it's not treated, it will get infected. Evelyn, without a second thought, took a small bundle of herbs and clean rags from her bag. I have some. My mother taught me. She knew a thing or two about folk medicine. She began to treat Billy's wound, her movements confident and gentle. Despite her dislike for the thug, Jim watched her, his steel eyes fixed on her hands, then on her face. Something akin to admiration, to surprise at her inner strength and kindness, flickered in his gaze. The attraction to her grew, turning into a more complex feeling that he could neither understand nor control. After the wounds were bandaged and the thugs were laid out, Jim returned to the fire. Evelyn sat across from him. Her face, illuminated by the dancing flames, seemed calm and serene, despite everything they had been through. "We'll take them to the nearest town," Jim said, his voice quiet. "There's a sheriff there. He'll handle it." "And then?" Evelyn asked, her gaze fixed on his face. Jim looked at her. The shadow of indecision returned to his eyes, but then it was replaced by firm resolve. "And then, we'll go to Oak Creek. I'll find Samuel Blackwood. And you can decide what to do next." Evelyn nodded. She knew her decision was already made. She wouldn't leave him alone, not now, when their fates were so closely intertwined. This night, full of violence and revelations, not only brought them closer, but also gave them a common goal, which was now something much bigger than just a quest for revenge or survival. It was the beginning of a journey on which they could find something more in each other than just companions. The early morning in the Sandstone Creek desert painted the horizon in soft shades of pink and gold. But for Evelyn Gray and Jim Holmes, it was not just a picturesque sight, but a harbinger of a long and dangerous road. The air still held a faint smell of gunpowder and blood, a reminder of the night's fight. Evelyn's wagon, now with 3 passengers, herself, Jim, and 2 wounded thugs, Mike and Billy, slowly moved away from the abandoned shack. Every movement of the wheels on the creaking ground echoed in the encroaching silence, broken only by the horses' snorts and the occasional groans of the wounded. Evelyn sat in the front, her hands tightly gripping the reins, her gaze focused on the endless horizon line. Her chestnut hair, the color of autumn nuts, was neatly braided, but a mix of weariness, resolve, and a deep, still not fully understood intrigue for this silent cowboy could be read in her blue eyes. Jim rode alongside, on his black Mustang, his figure, tall and powerful, serving as a reliable landmark. His steel eyes constantly scanned the surroundings, searching for the slightest signs of danger, and his hand, resting habitually on the hilt of his revolver, was ready for an instant reaction. He was on guard, but a new, barely perceptible note had appeared in his demeanor, which Evelyn noticed. He was no longer completely detached. He had become part of their small, unexpectedly formed group. After yesterday's revelations about his tragic past and about Samuel Blackwood, Evelyn felt that their fates were intertwined much deeper than a simple rescue. Compassion for his pain and a resolve to help him in his revenge now became part of her own motivation. She was no longer just following him, she was walking with him. They rode in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Evelyn constantly glanced back at the wagon, checking on the condition of the wounded. Mike, still with a torn shoulder, lay motionless, his face pale, but his breathing was steady. Billy, despite the pain, occasionally shot Evelyn looks full of hatred. He couldn't understand why she, the victim of their attack, was helping them. It was beyond his comprehension of the cruel world of the Wild West, where mercy was considered a weakness. But Evelyn didn't pay attention to him. Her kindness was unyielding, even in the face of blatant hostility. After a few hours of travel, when the sun rose high and began to mercilessly beat down, they reached a small, run-down town called Pine Ridge. It was a typical Wild West settlement. 2 or 3 streets, a few wooden shacks, a saloon, a general store, and, of course, the sheriff's office, the only stone building which inspired some confidence. The town was quiet, dusty, and sleepy. Only a few people sat on the saloon porch, lazily smoking pipes. Jim stopped his Mustang by Evelyn's wagon. "We can't risk riding into town with them. Blackwood's men might be here." His voice was quiet, but it had a steely ring to it. "You stay with the wagon. I'll take them to the sheriff." Evelyn felt a pang of anxiety. "But it's dangerous." "What if?" Jim interrupted her. "I know what I'm doing. Just stay here. And if someone comes up to you, say that they're sick, that you're going to the next town for a doctor." He dismounted, his movements confident and resolute. Then, without looking at Evelyn, he pulled the tied-up thugs out of the wagon. Mike, weakened, could barely stand. Billy, despite his wound, tried to break free, but Jim instantly used force, pinning him to the ground. "Come on, you bastard," Jin growled, his voice as cold as steel. "Your games are over." Jin dragged the wounded thugs towards the sheriff's office. Evelyn watched him, her heart pounding in her chest. She saw how he moved, like a predator, full of hidden strength. The residents of Pine Ridge, lazily watching the scene, whispered among themselves, their glances full of curiosity and fear. No one dared to interfere. Jim burst into the sheriff's office, his revolver at the ready. A few seconds later, an elderly, stout man with a gray beard and a sheriff's badge on his chest came out of the building. He looked surprised, but there was a hardness in his eyes. "What's going on here, Cowboy?" the sheriff rasped, his hand resting on the hilt of his revolver. Jim, without letting go of the thugs, briefly explained the situation. He told him about the attack on Evelyn, the fight, Blackwood's gang, and Samuel's plans to take over the land. The sheriff's face changed as he listened. He was clearly alarmed. "Blackwood, you say?" the sheriff mumbled, his gaze thoughtful. "I've heard of him. A dangerous man, but a railway here? That's too much." "It's the truth," Jim said firmly. "They want to buy up all the land, and if anyone gets in the way, they'll remove them." The sheriff looked at the wounded thugs for a long time, then at Jim. "All right, I'll lock them up, but you need to be careful, Cowboy. Blackwood doesn't forgive a grudge." "I know," Jim replied, "but neither do I." The sheriff nodded. He ordered his deputies to take the wounded men and throw them in a cell. Mike and Billy, weakened and humiliated, no longer resisted. Their fury had been replaced by despair. Jim left the sheriff's office and returned to Evelyn's wagon. His face was just as stern, but a sense of satisfaction had appeared in his eyes. One stage was complete. "They're locked up," he said, getting back on his horse. "Now we have time. We need to rest and eat." Evelyn nodded. She felt a huge sense of relief. They had managed it, but the road was still long. They stopped on the outskirts of town, by a small stream. Jim built a fire, and Evelyn took the last of their supplies from the wagon. They ate in silence, watching the setting sun. In her heart, a sense of trust in this man grew, mixed with a deep, almost instinctive affection. She saw how he cared for her, how he protected her, and it was something new for her, something she had been without for a long time. "Why are you taking such a risk, Jim?" she finally asked, her voice quiet. "You could have just left. Why all this trouble?" Jim looked at her, his steel eyes, reflecting the fire's flames, softened. "I can't just leave, Evelyn. This is my revenge. My duty. I promised myself I'd find him and make him pay." His voice was quiet, but it held an unwavering resolve that struck her. "And I couldn't leave you alone. You were in trouble." His words touched her to the core. There was no pathos in them, only a pure, naked truth. The attraction to him, to his honesty, to his inner strength, became all-consuming. She felt that this man, although surrounded by an aura of danger, was in fact deeply decent and noble. And that was the most important discovery for her. I'll go with you," Evelyn said, her voice firm. "To Oak Creek. I need to find out about the railway, and I can't leave you alone." She looked at him, her blue eyes full of resolve. "I've lost everything too. I know what it's like to fight." Jin looked at her for a long time, his gaze penetrating. Something elusive flickered in his eyes, maybe a slight smile, maybe an acknowledgement of her strength. "All right," he finally said, his voice quiet. "But you have to understand that it will be even more dangerous. Oak Creek is his territory. He's a king there." "I'm ready," Evelyn replied. She was ready for anything. She felt that her destiny, her life, was now inextricably linked with this man. And this feeling, though frightening, was also the most exciting she had ever experienced. Their path led into the unknown, but they were ready to walk it together. The dusty road leading to Oak Creek seemed like an endless thread, stretched across the sun-scorched prairies. Each day was like the last, but for Evelyn Gray and Jim Holmes, it was filled with new discoveries about each other and about the world they now shared. The sun, mercilessly beating down from the azure sky, cast strange shadows on the rocky canyons and rare, spiky bushes. The air was hot and dry, and every breath felt like a gulp of molten metal. Evelyn sat in the front of her wagon, her gaze, full of resolve, fixed on the distant horizon, where, according to rumor, lay the goal of their journey. Oak Creek, the lair of Samuel Blackwood. Her chestnut hair, the color of autumn nuts, escaped from under her hat, and new wrinkles, a testament to harsh trials, had appeared on her weathered face. but a fire burned in her blue eyes, one that only grew stronger with every mile they traveled. Her affection for Jim, now no longer just gratitude, but a deep, forming feeling, had become an integral part of her being. Jim rode alongside her, his black Mustang, whose black coat glistened in the sun, moving smoothly and confidently. Jim was as silent as ever, but now his silence didn't seem aloof or cold. It was filled with a calm strength or reliability that soothed Evelyn. His steel eyes constantly scanned the surroundings, searching for signs of danger, but now he turned his head more often towards Evelyn, catching her gaze, and something elusive, something akin to concern mixed with a deep, barely noticeable tenderness, flickered in his eyes. Every wrinkle, every scar on his face was a map of his harsh life, but Evelyn saw behind them not only pain but also a hidden humanity that he so carefully guarded. Along the way, they met only rare settlements, consisting of 2 or 3 shacks and a well, where they replenished their supplies of water and provisions. They avoided large towns, knowing that Blackwood's men could be everywhere. They spent their nights under the starry sky, where every star seemed brighter than anywhere else. By the fire, to the crackle of burning branches, they talked. At first, their conversations were short, about the weather, about the horses, about the road. But gradually, step by step, they became deeper, revealing their souls to each other. Evelyn told Jim about her life before the West, about her childhood on a farm, about her parents, about the dreams that were shattered by tragedy. Her voice, soft and melodious, filled the night with sadness, but at the same time, with hope. Jim listened to her intently, not interrupting, his gaze fixed on her face. She saw how her words touched him, how his stone mask cracked slightly, revealing the pain he had carried for so long. In turn, Jim, as if breaking an inner dam, began to tell Evelyn about his family, about his parents, about his brother, about his farm that Blackwood had burned down. His voice was quiet, but it held notes of a deep and healed wound. He spoke of the injustice, of the fury that had burned in him for years, of the thirst for revenge that had led him on this cruel path. Evelyn listened to him, her heart clenching with compassion. She felt his pain, his loneliness, and her own resolve to help him only grew stronger. She understood that his revenge was not just a thirst for blood, but an attempt to restore justice, to find peace in his tormented soul. One day, when they stopped for a break at a small oasis surrounded by high cliffs, Jim, to Evelyn's surprise, took an old, tattered book from his saddlebag. It was a volume of poetry. He sat by the fire, his steel eyes fixed on the flames, and then, as if overcoming an invisible barrier, he began to read. His voice, usually hoarse and low, became softer, filled with an unexpected tenderness as he recited poems about love, about loss, about the beauty of nature. Evelyn listened to him, her heart fluttering. She saw how 2 completely different sides coexisted in him. A ruthless warrior and a sensitive, vulnerable man, capable of appreciating the beauty of words and feelings. It was a revelation for her, one that only strengthened her attraction to him. He was much more complex than she could have imagined. It's my mother's book, Jim said, when he finished. His gaze was distant, as if he was seeing the past before him. She loved to read, and she taught me. Evelyn took the book, her fingers lightly touching the tattered cover. She must have been a wonderful woman. Jim only gave a short nod. Yeah, she was everything to me, until Blackwood came. Steel was in his voice, but now it lacked the pure fury from before, and was instead a deep, heavy sadness. That evening, under the starlight, Evelyn and Jim talked about life, about death, about the meaning of existence. They found solace in each other, in their shared grief, in their shared resolve. Evelyn felt that Jim was slowly but surely opening up to her, and that was the most precious thing for her. She saw him fighting his inner demons, and she wanted to help him find peace. Compassion for him, for his wounded soul, grew in her with a new force, intertwining with a deep affection. A few days into their journey, as they were nearing Oak Creek, the atmosphere changed. The air became more tense, and the road more lively. They began to encounter more armed riders, their gazes suspicious, scrutinizing. These were Blackwood's men, holding the town in their iron grip. Jim became even more cautious. He rode ahead of the wagon, his steel eyes especially sharp, and his hand constantly rested on the hilt of his revolver. He instructed Evelyn on how to behave if they ran into trouble. Don't look them in the eye, he said quietly. Don't show any fear. And don't say anything extra, only what's necessary. Evelyn nodded, her heart pounding, but she felt ready for anything. She trusted Jim, completely. Finally, the first buildings of Oak Creek appeared in the distance. The town was larger and livelier than Sandstone Creek. It looked more prosperous, but an invisible, yet tangible threat could be felt in its atmosphere. Suspicious people roamed the streets, their gazes full of cynicism and cruelty. Blackwood's law reigned here, and every resident knew it. Jim stopped the wagon on the outskirts of town, in a small, overgrown lot. "I'll go the rest of the way alone," he said, his voice quiet, but with a steel ring to it. "You stay here, hide the wagon, and wait for me." Evelyn felt a chill run down her body. "No, I'll go with you. I won't leave you alone." Her voice was full of determination, almost desperation. Her attraction to him, her desire to protect him, was too strong. She couldn't let him go into that hornet's nest alone. Jim looked at her, and something akin to anger flickered in his eyes, but he quickly reined himself in. "It's too dangerous, Evelyn. You shouldn't take the risk. This is my fight. It's my fight too." Evelyn countered, her blue eyes flashing. "Blackwood wanted to take everything from me, and I won't back down. I'm going with you." Jim looked at her for a long time, and something she didn't immediately understand appeared in his gaze, perhaps recognition, perhaps respect for her strength. He saw that she wouldn't back down, that she wasn't just a weak girl, but a woman capable of anything. "All right," he finally said, his voice quiet, but with a note of acceptance. "But you have to obey me, without question, and don't poke your head out. Otherwise." He didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. "We need to be very careful. Oak Creek is his lair." Evelyn nodded. She felt adrenaline surging through her veins. Fear was mixed with excitement and firm resolve. Together, they were about to face Blackwood, and something inside her told her that this wouldn't just be a fight, but a decisive battle that would change their lives forever. Their attraction to each other was no longer just an emotion, but an unbreakable bond that connected them in the face of mortal danger. The suffocating heat of the day in Oak Creek was gradually giving way to twilight, but the tension in the air only thickened, like an invisible web that had entangled every alley and every soul in the town. Evelyn Gray, sitting in the front of her wagon, hidden in the thickets on the outskirts, felt her heart pounding against her ribs, beating a rhythm of anxiety and anticipation. The town, spread out before them, seemed prosperous. Brightly lit saloon windows, the clang of a piano, a muffled murmur of voices. But behind this mask of well-being lay the iron grip of Samuel Blackwood. Her chestnut hair, the color of autumn nuts, was hidden under the hood of an old road cloak, and her blue eyes, usually shining with resolve, now carefully studied every passing silhouette, trying to catch a hint of a threat. Her affection for Jim, already deep and unshakable, gave her strength, but also intensified her fear for his life. Jim Holmes seemed to have merged with the shadows. His tall, lean figure, dressed in his usual faded clothes, was almost invisible among the creeping darkness. His steel eyes, the color of a stormy sky, glided over the town, absorbing every detail. He was the embodiment of a quiet, yet deadly predator, whose calmness was deceptive. The two handles of his Colts gleamed dully, ready for instant action. He had left his black Mustang in a small, abandoned barn nearby, and then, walking around the wagon, he approached Evelyn. His movements were silent, as if he were a part of the night itself. "I'm going ahead to scout." Jim's voice was quiet but firm, like tempered steel. "You stay here. Don't come out until I return. And be careful. Blackwood's men are everywhere. They may be dressed like ordinary residents, but their eyes, they give them away." His gaze, lingering for a moment on her face, was full of deep concern, which he no longer tried to hide. In it, there was not just a warning, but a hidden plea for her safety. Evelyn nodded, her heart clenching at the understanding of the full danger. "I'll wait. But be careful, Jim." She wanted to say more, but the words got stuck in her throat. At that moment, their eyes met, and an invisible spark passed between them. It was not just an attraction, but a deep, unspoken bond that was growing between them, like a powerful root breaking through dry ground. Jim only gave a short nod and disappeared into the labyrinth of Oak Creek's narrow streets. Evelyn was left alone, but her solitude was now different. It was filled with the feeling of his presence, his struggle, his purpose. She felt that she had become part of something bigger than her own unfortunate fate. She took out her carbine, checked the chamber, and placed it beside her. Then, taking a small, tattered diary of her mother's, she began to read. The words about love, about hope, about the strength of the spirit, all of it gave her comfort and inspiration. Meanwhile, Jim, like a shadow, slid through the lighted streets of Oak Creek. He moved cautiously, blending in with the crowd, but his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, didn't miss a single detail. He noticed the wary glances, the hidden gestures, the special way of carrying themselves that gave away Blackwood's men. They were everywhere, by the saloons, by the general stores, in the dark alleys. The town was their fortress, and they guarded it jealously. Jim headed to the Black Rabbit Saloon, the place where, according to Billy, he could find Old Jack, Blackwood's right-hand man. The saloon was noisy and crowded. Inside, there was a semi-darkness, mixed with the acrid smoke of cigars, to smell of cheap whiskey and sweat. The clinking of glasses, loud laughter, the sounds of an out-of-tune piano, all of it created an atmosphere of revelry and lawlessness. Jim, without drawing attention to himself, took a table in the corner, which offered a good view of the entire room. He ordered whiskey and, sipping it slowly, began to look around. His gaze, cold and assessing, glided over the faces of the patrons, searching for familiar features. After a while, he noticed him, an elderly, stout man with gray, disheveled hair and a thick beard. His face was riddled with deep wrinkles, and his eyes, small and piercing, constantly surveyed the room. He sat at a table, surrounded by several burly guys who were clearly his bodyguards. This was Old Jack. Jim recognized him from the description. Old Jack looked like a typical inhabitant of the Wild West, but a hidden strength, toughness, and cruelty could be felt in his demeanor. His way of carrying himself, his gaze, full of cynicism and weariness, revealed a man who had seen too much evil and was himself a part of it. He was dressed in a tattered leather jacket, under which a dirty shirt could be seen. An old but reliable revolver hung on his belt. He laughed loudly, telling something to his henchmen, and his laughter, hoarse and clit, echoed through the saloon. Jim finished his whiskey. He knew he couldn't just walk up to Old Jack and get the information. That would be suicide. He needed a plan. A plan that would allow him to get everything he needed without risking Evelyn's life. The thought of her safety, had become his priority. Over the years of his revenge, he had grown accustomed to loneliness, to his life being worth nothing. But now everything had changed. He felt that his destiny, his purpose, was now tied to this girl who had so unexpectedly burst into his world. He left the saloon, deep in thought. Night had fully taken over, and Oak Creek seemed even more sinister. The streets had become quieter. Only a few figures slunk in the shadows. Jim headed back to Evelyn's wagon. He needed to discuss his observations with her. He needed her help, her fresh perspective on the situation. When he returned, Evelyn was sitting by the fire, her face illuminated by the dancing flames. She looked up, her blue eyes, full of anxiety, met his gaze. She saw in his eyes not only resolve but also a deep weariness that shone through his stone mask. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice quiet but full of readiness. Jim sat down beside her. His muscles relaxed, but the inner tension remained. "Old Jack is in the Black Rabbit. He's Blackwood's right-hand man, and he knows where Blackwood is." He briefly described his observations in the saloon, characterizing Jack as a cunning and cruel man. "But he's surrounded by his dogs. You can't just get to him." Evelyn listened carefully, then her gaze, full of thoughtfulness, turned to the fire. "So, we need to use cunning, not force." A new note sounded in her voice of strategic thinking, which Jim hadn't immediately expected from her. He saw in her not only kindness, but also a sharp mind, an ability for analysis that could be very useful. This only increased his attraction to her, growing into a deep respect. "Cunning?" Jim raised an eyebrow, his steel eyes fixed on her face. "Yes." Evelyn looked up at him, her eyes glistening in the firelight. "Old Jackie probably loves money, and maybe he's not as loyal to Blackwood as he seems, or he might be more vulnerable than you think." She spoke calmly. Her voice was confident, and a spark of excitement burned in her eyes. "We need bait, something that will make him distract himself from his bodyguards, or something that will lure him out of the saloon." Jim looked at her for a long time. Surprise mixed with admiration flickered in his eyes. Her courage, her determination, her mind, it all amazed him. He was used to acting alone, relying only on himself, but now he felt that he had a person beside him who could be not just a companion, but a real partner. And this feeling was new and exhilarating for him. "What kind of bait?" he asked, his voice quiet, but now with a note of genuine interest. Evelyn smiled. Her smile, rare and sincere, lit up her face, making her even more beautiful. "Me. I'll be the bait, Jim. I know what to do." Jim tensed instantly. No. It's too dangerous. You can't risk it. A genuine fear, which he didn't try to hide, rang out in his voice. To care for her safety, was stronger than his own revenge. What's the other way? Evelyn countered, her voice firm. I can be useful. I can distract him, or I can make him talk. She looked at him, her blue eyes full of resolve. I'm not weak, Jim. And I won't back down. We're in this together, aren't we? Jim looked at her, and in his eyes, anger, fear, and admiration fought. He saw her strength, her resolve. He understood that he wouldn't be able to stop her. And at that moment, he realized that his feelings for her went far beyond simple attraction or compassion. It was love, a deep, real love that was born out of hatred and danger. He understood that now he was not just an avenger, he was a protector. A protector of this woman who had so unexpectedly become the meaning of his life. And for her sake, he was ready for anything. He nodded. His voice was quiet. All right, but we'll do it my way, and you'll do only what I say. Without question. Evelyn smiled, her heart filled with triumph. She knew her audacious plan had worked. They were a team. And now they had to face the most important task. Night had fallen on Oak Creek, and in its shadows lay not only danger but also the opportunity to change their lives forever. Their love, born in the fire of the Wild West, was ready to withstand any trial, any challenge. The nocturnal coolness of Oak Creek seemed to only intensify the heat that was boiling in Evelyn Gray's veins. Sitting by the dying fire on the outskirts of town, she listened intently to Jim Holmes, who was outlining his plan in detail. His words were clear and relentlessly pragmatic, but in his steel eyes, reflecting the dancing flames, she caught a glimpse of deep anxiety. He spoke of strategy, of possible dangers, of the need to be unequivocally precise, but every look, every slight movement of his powerful hands betrayed his growing concern for her safety. He was a warrior, accustomed to risk, but this risk, it seemed, had become unbearable when it concerned her. This feeling, that he was ready to risk everything for her, only strengthened her attraction and trust in him. The Black Rabbit Saloon will be full. You need to be noticeable, but not too much, so as not to raise alarm. Jim's voice was quiet, but commanding. Old Jack doesn't like it when he's challenged directly. He likes easy victories, and he likes beauty. His gaze slid over her face, lingering for a moment. You'll be the bait. You have to attract his attention. Then, I'll lure him out of the saloon. Evelyn nodded, her heart pounding wildly. But there was no trace of fear in her blue eyes, only pure resolve. I understand, but how will you lure him out? Jim looked down, his lips pressed into a thin line. That's my part of the plan. You don't need to know all the details. Just be ready for him to take the bait. And don't panic. He didn't want to burden her with unnecessary information, understanding that in a moment of danger, knowledge could become a burden. His decision to protect her from all the details was a manifestation not only of trust but also of deep care. They spent another hour, refining the details. Evelyn understood that her role was not just to be a beautiful girl, but a smart and cunning actress, capable of playing on Old Jack's weaknesses. Jim explained the nuances of behavior, the ways of reading body language, the signals he would give. This joint preparation, this immersion in a dangerous world where every word and movement mattered, brought them even closer. Not only mortal danger, but also a barely perceptible spark, foretelling something more, hung in the air. Finally, Jim stood up. It's time, he said, his voice quiet but full of resolve. Are you ready? Evelyn stood up, her chestnut hair, the color of autumn nuts, scattered over her shoulders. She was wearing her best, though simple, dark green woolen dress, which emphasized her slender figure. She had undone her braid, and the long curls framed her oval face. Her eyes, large and expressive, now sparkled in the firelight. She looked not just beautiful, but majestic, full of hidden strength and charm. She was the embodiment of the very nature of the Wild West, wild, untamed, and beautiful. I'm ready, she replied. Her voice was firm, without a single tremor. Jim looked at her intently, and something akin to admiration mixed with anxiety flickered in his steel eyes. He held out his small but sharp knife, which he always carried in his belt. Keep this with you. If something goes wrong, defend yourself. Evelyn took the knife. Its steel was cold and hard. It was not just a weapon, it was a manifestation of his trust, of his care. She hid it in her belt. Jim led her to the town, avoiding the main streets and moving through the dark alleys. He was as cautious as a wild animal. His movements were silent and precise. Finally, they reached the Black Rabbit Saloon. The music was louder, light poured from the windows, and drunk voices spilled from the doors. "Remember what we discussed?" Jim whispered, his gaze fixed on her face. "I'll wait around the corner. As soon as he comes out, I'll give the signal. And you have to run." "To the Mustang." Evelyn nodded. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her wildly pounding heart. This was the moment of truth. She entered the saloon. The noise, smoke, and clamor instantly hit her, like a deafening wave. The men sitting at the tables, carousing at the bar, instantly turned their heads, their gazes, full of curiosity and lust, fixed on her. The women in the saloon were mostly dancers or prostitutes, and the appearance of such a clean, yet so attractive girl was an unusual sight for them. Evelyn, holding herself straight, walked to the bar. Her movements were graceful and confident. She ordered a glass of water. Old Jack, sitting at his table, instantly noticed her. His small, piercing eyes, full of cynicism, narrowed. He whispered something to his bodyguards, and they, after giving Evelyn a scrutinizing look, refocused on their cards. Jack slowly rose. His stout figure, clad in a tattered leather jacket, slowly moved towards the bar. His gaze was fixed on Evelyn, and a predatory anticipation could be read in it. "What are you doing here, pretty thing?" Old Jack's voice was hoarse, saturated with whiskey and years. He stopped next to her, his breath, smelling of tobacco, wafted over her face. "This isn't a place for the likes of you. Unless you're looking for company." His hand, thick and calloused, with a gold ring on the ring finger, landed on the bar, almost touching her hand. Evelyn, without flinching, slowly turned to him. Her blue eyes, full of purity, met his gaze. She knew she had to play her role perfectly. "I'm looking for work." Her voice was quiet, but it held a note of desperation, which she played masterfully. "My father, he died. I have no one, and I need money. Any work." Old Jack laughed out loud. His laugh was clipped and unpleasant. "Work, you say? In Sandstone Creek? A pretty thing like you will find work, and what a job. Much more profitable than washing dishes." His gaze slid over her figure, making Evelyn feel exposed. "I can help you, little girl. I have connections. And money. A lot of money." His hand, still resting on the counter, moved closer to hers, trying to make contact. Evelyn slowly moved away, her gaze full of feigned fear and indecision. I don't know what you're talking about. You will understand." Old Jack rasped, his eyes burning with lust. "I can give you everything you want. Money, food, clothes, and protection. From all these thugs who roam the town." He nodded towards his bodyguards, who were now watching them with undisguised curiosity. "You'll be safe with me." Evelyn felt nauseous but continued to play her part. I don't know. I need to think." She gave him a look full of doubt, but at the same time, with a hint of hope. It was that very look that was supposed to lure him in. Old Jack smiled, his rotten teeth bared. "Of course. Think about it. But not for long. The likes of you don't go unnoticed for long in this town." He took a small pouch with gold coins from his pocket and placed it on the counter. "This is for you to think about, and so you know how generous I am." Evelyn took the pouch, her fingers trembling slightly. She lowered her gaze, as if shy. But in reality, her mind was working frantically. A signal from Jim. She needed a signal. At that moment, a deafening shot rang out in the saloon. The sound of breaking glass, screams, panic, gunpowder smoke instantly filled the room. Everyone in the saloon, including Old Jack's bodyguards, rushed to the exit, trying to figure out what had happened. Old Jack, disoriented for a moment, also moved towards the doors. His eyes were full of rage. "What the hell is going on?" This was Jim's signal. Evelyn understood. She threw the pouch with gold onto the floor, and the coins scattered across the dirty boards. Then, without losing a second, she rushed to the back exit of the saloon, which she had noticed earlier. She ran as fast as she could, her heart pounding, and adrenaline surging through her veins. Old Jack, noticing her escape, instantly realized he had been tricked. "Grab her. Now!" he roared. His voice was full of fury. He rushed after her, his stout figure moving surprisingly fast. His bodyguards, recovering from the panic, joined the chase. Evelyn ran through the dark alleys of Oak Creek, her lungs burning, and her legs almost giving way. Behind her, she heard the thud of her pursuers, their shouts, their threats. She knew she had little chance if they caught her. But she didn't give up. She ran towards the Mustang, towards Jim, towards her savior. Suddenly, a tall figure leapt from the shadows. Jim. He grabbed Evelyn's hand. His fingers squeezed hers tightly, and he pulled her along, not letting her stop. Faster, he growled. His voice was low but full of urgency. They ran towards the small barn where Jim had left his Mustang. Behind them, breathing heavily, old Jack and his bodyguards gave chase. The distance was closing. Bursting into the barn, Jim instantly leapt onto the Mustang, and with one motion, he lifted Evelyn, seating her in front of him. Then, tugging on the reins, he shot at the lock on the barn gates, and the Mustang, smashing them with a thunderous crash, flew out, picking up speed. They galloped through the night streets of Oak Creek, leaving clouds of dust behind them. Behind them, they heard old Jack's shouts, his curses, the sounds of gunshots. Bullets whistled over their heads, but Jim, leaning down, pressed Evelyn to him, shielding her with his body. The Mustang, as if sensing the danger, flew forward, its hooves beating a rhythm of freedom. "Jim, where are we going?" Evelyn shouted, trying to be heard over the rush of the wind. "To the desert," Jim roared. His voice was full of resolve. "They won't get us there." They broke out of the town, leaving the lights of Oak Creek behind, which gradually diminished, turning into distant, twinkling points. The night enveloped them, and millions of stars shone overhead. Evelyn felt safe in his arms, in the arms of this man who was risking his life for her. At that moment, she realized that her feelings for him were not just an attraction, not just compassion, but a real, deep love that was born from fire and danger. And she knew that for him, for their common goal, she was ready for anything. Their path led into the unknown, but they were ready to walk it together, holding on to each other, because now they were not just companions, but two souls bound by one destiny, one purpose, and one great, true love. The desert, shrouded in a velvet veil of night, took Evelyn Gray and Jim Holmes into its boundless embrace, washing away the dust of Oak Creek and the echoes of the chase. The Mustang, breathing heavily but steadily, galloped away from the flickering lights of the town, which gradually dimmed and disappeared beyond the horizon. Evelyn, pressed against Jim's sturdy back, felt the beating of his heart powerful and even, like a metronome, measuring the rhythm of their new, shared life. Her chestnut hair, tousled by the wind, tickled his neck, and her hands tightly hugged his waist, weaving into the faded fabric of his shirt. The fear from the chase gradually gave way to a new feeling of complete, unconditional safety, protected by this stern, but now immeasurably loved man. Jim, his head bowed, held her close, as if shielding her from all the hardships of this merciless world. His steel eyes, the color of a stormy sky, peered intently into the darkness, searching for a path among the countless rocks and prickly bushes, but at the same time, he felt her warmth, her trust, her love. This was a new sensation for him, one he seemed to have never experienced, but which now filled him to the brim, displacing years of emptiness and pain. A light had finally been lit in his soul, which had been scorched by revenge, and that light was Evelyn. They galloped like that for several hours, until the Mustang, exhausted and lathered, slowed down. Jim, assessing the situation, decided to stop. They were in a deep canyon, surrounded by high, sheer cliffs that seemed like ghostly giants in the moonlight. It was quiet and safe here. Jim dismounted, and then carefully helped Evelyn get down. Her legs gave way from fatigue and the stress they had endured, but he held her firmly. His hands were reliable and strong. "Are you all right?" His voice was quiet, but it held an unaccustomed tenderness that made Evelyn's heart skip a beat. Evelyn nodded, unable to say a word. She simply pressed herself against him, burying her face in his chest. His smell, the smell of dust, leather, sweat, and freedom, was the sweetest scent in the world to her. Jim hugged her back, his powerful arms squeezed her tightly, as if he was afraid she would disappear. At that moment, under the vast, starry sky, they were one two souls who had finally found each other in the endless desert. Jim built a small fire from dry branches and bushes that he managed to gather. The flames quickly flared up, casting dancing shadows on the canyon walls and their focused faces. Evelyn took a flask of water and a few crackers from the small bag that Jim had managed to grab from the wagon. This was their only supply. They ate in silence, but this silence was filled with unspoken words, deep understanding, and love. Every one of their glances, every touch spoke of what they had endured together, and what they still had to endure. We have to go on, Jim said when they finished. His voice was quiet, but it held a firm resolve. Blackwood won't rest. He'll send his men after us. We have to find him before he finds us. Evelyn nodded. She understood that their journey was not yet over. The main battle awaited them, the battle for Jim's justice, the battle for their future. But now she was ready for anything. Next to him, she was not afraid of anything. Where can we find him, Jim? She asked, her blue eyes full of questions. Jim looked at the fire. His steel eyes became thoughtful. Dilly said he had a new gold deal in Oak Creek, and that he had a man, old Jack, who knew everything. But Jack, he was too loyal to Blackwood. He wouldn't have given him up so easily. A note of doubt in his voice made Evelyn frown. So, Billy lied. Jim shook his head. Not entirely. He told the truth about old Jack and the gold, but he probably didn't know that Blackwood was here. He's been planning something big for a long time. The railway. It's only part of his plan. Evelyn flinched. So, we're back to the beginning. He's still here. In Oak Creek. Jim nodded. Yes. And now that we've lured Jack out, we have the advantage. He'll be looking for us, and we will find him. There was steel in his voice, but now it lacked the former pure thirst for revenge, and was rather a cold, calculating resolve aimed at restoring justice. They spent the rest of the night discussing the plan. Evelyn, with her sharp mind and intuition, helped Jim think through every detail. She offered unconventional solutions, analyzed possible risks, and considered the psychology of Blackwood and his men. Jim, in turn, admired her perceptiveness and courage. He saw that she was not just a beautiful woman, but a strong, smart partner, capable of thinking strategically and acting decisively. Their joint work, their mutual trust only strengthened and their love, making it as solid as the rocks around them. At dawn, when the first rays of the sun painted the canyon tops in orange and purple tones, they were ready. Their plan was honed, their resolve unwavering. We'll go back to Oak Creek, Jim said. His voice was quiet but full of steely resolve. But this time, we'll act differently. Evelyn nodded. She felt that this would be their decisive battle, a battle that would change their lives forever, a battle that would allow them to close the page of the past and start a new life, filled with love, justice, and hope. They mounted the Mustang, and it, as if sensing their resolve, galloped forward, towards the rising sun, towards a new destiny. Evelyn, pressing against Jim, felt her heart fill not only with love but also with faith. Faith in him, faith in herself, faith in their future. Conclusion. This story, set against the harsh backdrop of the 1880s, Old West, deeply touches upon the themes of healing, finding purpose, and the power of love. Through the characters of Evelyn and Jim, we see how the pain of loss and the thirst for revenge can cripple a soul, turning a person into a lone warrior. However, an encounter with someone who can show compassion and see the true essence behind a mask of harshness can become a catalyst for rebirth. Evelyn, who lost everything and was left alone in a cruel world, finds the strength not only to survive but also to preserve her kindness and empathy. She teaches Jim that life is not just a fight and revenge, but also the ability to feel, to love, and to believe in a better future. Jim, in turn, embodies the idea that even the deepest wounds can be healed if there is a person by your side who can see in you not a monster, but a wounded soul, worthy of love. Lesson. In the modern world, where there is so much pain, disappointment, and conflict, this story reminds us of timeless values. It teaches us that even in the darkest of times, hope and love can become a beacon, lighting the way. Often, people who have endured many hardships close themselves off, become cynical, and are afraid to open up to others. But it is through compassion, empathy, and the ability to trust that we can find healing and new meaning in life. Like Jim, many of us carry old grudges and traumas that prevent us from living life to the fullest. Like Evelyn, we can feel lonely and lost, but it is important to remember that even one person can change your life if you allow them to enter it. This story emphasizes that true strength lies not in the ability to seek revenge, but in the ability to forgive, to have compassion, and, of course, to love. It urges us not to lose faith in humanity, even when the world seems cruel, and to always be open to the possibility of meeting someone who will help us find our own light.